The Cabin by Autumn Lake. Chapter 1. Arrival at Autumn Lake. The road to Autumn Lake was narrow, bending like a ribbon through the hills of Virginia. Yellow leaves floated across the windshield as the car rolled slowly forward. The world outside seemed painted in shades of gold, amber, and red. It was the season of change. The season when trees let go of what they no longer needed. Samuel Hartman kept both hands on the steering wheel. He was 58 years old, recently retired, and uncertain about what the next chapter of his life might look like. For more than 30 years he had served as a firefighter. His days had been filled with alarms, rushing footsteps, and heavy smoke. Now the alarms were silent, and the quiet felt almost too heavy. The cabin by Autumn Lake had belonged to his grandparents. He had not been there in decades, not since he was a boy of 12. Yet when the retirement papers were signed and the days stretched out like an empty road, something in his heart whispered, "Go back. Go back to the lake." He had listened to that whisper. And now, as the car turned down a gravel path, the lake came into view. It lay still and wide, reflecting the orange sky like a mirror. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Somewhere far away a crow called, its voice echoing across the valley. Samuel parked the car and sat for a moment, listening. It was so quiet here. No sirens, no traffic, no city noise. Only the rustle of leaves, the breath of the wind, the heartbeat of the earth itself. He stepped out of the car. Gravel crunched under his boots. His breath rose in small white clouds, the first sign of the colder nights ahead. He pulled his jacket closer and looked at the cabin. The cabin was small, built from dark logs that had aged with time. The roof sloped gently, covered with brown shingles that looked older than Samuel himself. A porch wrapped around the front, its wooden railing rough with splinters. The windows were dusty, but behind the dust he could almost see the glow of old memories. He stood there a long while, remembering. His grandmother's voice calling him in for supper. The smell of cornbread and apple pie. His grandfather's laugh deep and warm as they fished together at the lake. Childhood had lived here once. And now, perhaps, something new could live here again. The key and the door. Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out the old brass key. He had found it in a drawer when he sorted through his late mother's belongings. The metal was scratched, the teeth worn down, but it still fit the lock. He slid it in. The door resisted for a moment, as if the cabin had been holding its breath for years. Then, with a sigh, it opened. The air inside was cool and musty, carrying the scent of dust and cedar. Light filtered through the windows in narrow beams, catching dust motes that drifted like tiny stars. Samuel stepped inside slowly. The wooden floor creaked under his weight. There was the stone fireplace, blackened with soot from fires long ago. There was the rocking chair, still standing in the corner where his grandmother had once sat with her knitting. Shelves lined the walls, half empty, but a few books remained. Chapter 2. The First Night. The cabin was silent after Samuel blew out the lantern. Darkness wrapped itself around the room, soft but complete. He lay still on the old quilt, listening to the world beyond the walls. At first, there was only the natural rhythm of night, the rustle of branches, the faint lapping of water against the shore, the occasional cry of an owl. But then came something else, a sound like a sigh, gentle, almost human. Samuel opened his eyes. The loft was dim, lit only by the pale light of the moon streaming through the window. Shadows stretched across the ceiling. He held his breath and listened again. There it was, faint, distant, as if someone whispered from the far end of the room. He told himself it was the wind. The cabin was old, its walls had cracks where air slipped through. Old wood often spoke at night, creaking and settling. But even as he tried to reason with himself, his heart beat a little faster. Restless thoughts. Sleep did not come quickly. Samuel shifted beneath the quilt, staring at the beams overhead. His mind wandered, chasing memories that rose from the silence. He thought of fire, the roar of it, the blinding heat. He remembered the times he had carried people out of burning buildings, feeling the weight of their lives in his arms. He remembered faces, some saved, some lost. The job had been more than work, it had been his identity. And now it was gone. The quiet cabin pressed those thoughts against him. Without the rush of duty, without the constant call of the station, he was left alone with questions. Who was he now? What would fill his days? He turned on his side and looked at the photograph on the nightstand. His parents smiled back at him, captured in a summer long past. His mother had loved the cabin. She had said it was a place where the soul could breathe. Perhaps that was why he had returned. A whisper in the dark. The whisper came again, clearer this time, like the brush of a voice against the air. Samuel sat up. His pulse quickened. The loft was empty, but the sound lingered. He listened, his breath held tight in his chest. "Welcome back." 2 words, barely audible but distinct. He stood, his feet touching the cool wooden floor. The boards creaked as he moved toward the window. He looked out at the lake, silver beneath the moon. The water lay still, untouched, reflecting the stars. No one was there. He rubbed his forehead and gave a short laugh, half nervous, half relieved. Chapter 3. Letters in the Attic. The third morning at the cabin began with mist rolling across the lake. It floated above the water like a soft blanket, hiding the far shore. The trees stood as dark shapes behind the veil, their fiery leaves glowing faintly through the fog. Samuel sipped his coffee on the porch, watching the mist rise and drift away. The silence felt different today, not heavy, not lonely, but patient, as if the lake was waiting for him to notice something. He thought about the trunk he had found in the attic the day before, the journal, the letters. They had pulled at his curiosity like a string he could not ignore. "Today," he murmured, "I'll open them." The attic again. The attic door creaked when he pulled it open. Dust swirled in the air as he climbed the narrow stairs. The space was small, the roof sloping low, the wood beams old but strong. Sunlight filtered through the single round window, drawing a pale circle on the floor. The trunks waited in their corners, silent guardians of the past. Samuel knelt by the old chest. His hands brushed over the leather handle, cracked with age, and the brass corners dulled with time. When he lifted the lid, the smell of cedar and paper rose like a memory of autumn long gone. The letters lay in neat bundles, tied with faded ribbons, blue, red, and gold. Some envelopes were yellow with age, others still held their color. On many the handwriting was elegant, flowing, almost formal. At the bottom rested the journal. The cover was dark brown, the leather worn smoothed by years of touch. Samuel sat cross-legged on the floor, the light falling across his lap. Slowly he untied one bundle of letters. The first letter. The first envelope was dated October 12, 1947. The ink had faded, but the words remained clear. "My dearest Margaret," it began. "The lake is quiet tonight. The trees are turning gold, and the air smells of wood smoke. I sat on the porch thinking of you, and I wished more than anything that you were here. One day, when our lives allow, I will bring you to this place. It feels like a secret kept just for us." Samuel stopped, his throat tight. Margaret had been his grandmother's name. He knew without doubt that the writer was his grandfather, Thomas Hartman. He read on. "I worked hard today repairing the roof and stacking firewood. Simple tasks, but they remind me that a home is more than walls. A home is a promise. I want this cabin to be a place where our family can always return, a place where no one feels lost." The words blurred for a moment as Samuel blinked away the sting of tears. His grandparents had died years ago, but here was their voice alive again on paper. The journal. After reading several letters, Samuel reached for the journal. Its pages were filled with handwriting, sometimes neat, sometimes hurried. The entries told of fishing trips, storms, and quiet evenings by the fire. But they also told of Chapter 4. The Visitor. The morning after Samuel discovered the letters, the air was crisp and clear. The mist on the lake had lifted, and sunlight sparkled across the surface like broken glass. He brewed coffee, poured it into his old enamel mug, and carried it outside to the porch. The cabin creaked as it warmed in the sun, the wood expanding after the cool night. Somewhere in the trees, a woodpecker tapped, steady and insistent. Samuel sat in the rocking chair, the journal resting on his lap. He had not planned the day yet. Maybe he would chop some wood. Maybe walk the trail along the north side of the lake. But for the first time in months, he felt no rush. The day could unfold slowly, like the turning of a page. He had just lifted the mug to his lips when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Samuel froze. No one came to the cabin, not anymore. An unexpected car. Down the narrow road, a car appeared, an old green pickup truck, its paint chipped, its bed filled with bundles of firewood. The engine hummed softly, then cut as the truck pulled up in front of the cabin. The driver stepped out, a woman, perhaps in her late 50s, wearing a flannel shirt, jeans, and a cap pulled low over her short gray hair. Her face was weathered, but kind, with the strength of someone who had lived close to the land. She looked up at the cabin, then at Samuel, her expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. "Well, I'll be," she said, her voice carrying easily in the clear morning air, "if it isn't Sam Hartman." Samuel blinked. It had been decades since anyone called him that. He rose slowly from the chair. "Do I know you?" The woman grinned. "Guess the years did their work. It's me, Clara Jensen, from across the lake. We used to chase each other through the woods when we were kids. You can't have forgotten that." Remembering Clara. Samuel stared for a long moment. Then the memory surfaced like a fish breaking water. Clara Jensen, the neighbor's daughter. They had fished together, built forts from fallen branches, and once spent a whole afternoon daring each other to jump from the highest rock into the lake. "Clara," he said slowly, the name fitting into place. "I'll be damned." She laughed, a warm, rough sound. "That's more like it. I thought maybe the city had scrubbed you right out of my mind." Samuel shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. "No, just buried under a lot of years, I guess." She walked up the porch steps, her boots thudding on the wood. "I heard someone was fixing up the cabin. Figured it had to be you. Nobody else would bother." Coffee and conversation. Samuel poured her a cup of coffee, and they sat together on the porch, the lake stretching out before them. For a while they spoke of simple things, how the town had changed, which families had stayed, which had gone. Clara had remained near the lake all her life. She ran a small firewood business, delivered lumber, and tended a garden that kept her through the winters. She spoke plainly, with humor tucked into her words. "And you," she said, tilting her head, "you went off and became a firefighter, didn't you? My brother mentioned it once, said you were one of the best." Samuel nodded, his gaze steady on the water. 33 years, then retirement. She studied him for a moment. "You look like a man still carrying some of those fires inside." He gave a short laugh, surprised by her accuracy. "Maybe I am." Walking the shore. Later, they walked the path along the lake together. The leaves crunched beneath their boots, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. Clara pointed out familiar places, the rock where they had once jumped into the water, the tree they had carved their initials into when they were 10. The marks were still faintly visible, weathered but not erased. "You were always the brave one," Clara said, smiling. "I'd climb halfway up that tree and freeze. You'd go all the way to the top without thinking twice." Samuel chuckled. "Funny. These days I think too much before I do anything." "That's age for you," she said, giving him a playful nudge. "But maybe the lake can teach." Chapter 5. The Storm. The weather changed quickly in the mountains. One morning the lake lay calm and blue beneath a soft sky, and by afternoon clouds gathered like armies marching in from the horizon. Samuel noticed the shift while chopping wood. The wind picked up, sharp and restless, carrying the smell of rain. Leaves swirled in sudden gusts, rattling across the ground like dry paper. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked toward the lake. The water had darkened, turning the color of steel. Ripples moved across the surface, uneasy, as if the lake itself sensed what was coming. "Storm," Samuel muttered to himself. He set down the axe and began gathering the firewood into stacks on the porch. Shadows over the lake. By evening, the sky was almost black. Thunder rumbled far away, rolling across the hills like distant drums. Samuel lit the lantern inside the cabin and checked the windows, securing the latches. The air was heavy, pressing down on the cabin. Every breath carried the taste of rain. The fire he built in the hearth burned hot, but even its warmth couldn't chase away the sense of tension that filled the room. Samuel sat at the table, the journal open before him. He traced his fingers along the faded words of his grandfather. "The cabin will always wait for those who need it." Thunder cracked suddenly, close and sharp. The cabin trembled. Samuel closed the journal and stood, his pulse quickening. The storm had arrived. The storm breaks. Rain lashed against the windows, streaming down in wild patterns. The wind howled through the trees, bending branches and tearing leaves free. The sound was constant, fierce, like the roar of 1,000 voices. Inside, the cabin groaned. The roof creaked, the shutters banged, the old logs shivered under the assault. Samuel fed more wood into the fire, its crackle competing with the storm outside. Lightning flashed, bright and blinding. For an instant, the whole cabin was lit in silver, and Samuel saw his shadow thrown tall against the wall. Then darkness again, and the rumble of thunder shaking the ground. He stood at the window, watching the storm rage across the lake. Waves rose and crashed against the shore. The peaceful mirror of water was gone, replaced by a wild, living force. Storm within. As he watched, he felt something stir inside him. The storm outside seemed to mirror the storm within. For years he had carried the weight of fire, its destruction, its fury, its noise. He had seen homes collapse, lives broken, hope reduced to ashes. He had fought against that chaos, always running into danger, always pushing his fear aside. Now, as the thunder roared and the lightning split the sky, the memories came rushing back. He saw faces of those he had lost, friends, comrades, strangers he couldn't save. Their voices rose with the storm, echoing in his mind. His hands clenched into fists. "I did everything I could," he whispered into the wind. "I did everything I could." But doubt pressed harder. Had he really done enough? What was enough when lives had been lost? A knock at the door. Suddenly, over the roar of the storm came a sound. A knock, 3 quick raps against the cabin. Chapter 6. The Walk Around the Lake. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered. The ground was soft and damp, carrying the smell of wet leaves and pine. Drops of rain clung to every branch, glittering in the morning light. Samuel stood on the porch, breathing in the fresh air. The world felt renewed, as though it had been washed clean overnight. The lake, once furious with waves, now rested in stillness, reflecting the pale sky. Clara was still asleep inside. Samuel didn't want to wake her. He slipped on his boots, pulled his jacket tight, and set out for a walk around the lake. The path. The path curved gently along the water's edge, narrow and uneven. Fallen leaves covered the trail in shades of gold, amber, and deep red. Each step Samuel took released a faint crunch beneath his feet. He remembered walking this same path as a boy, racing his cousins to see who could reach the far side first. Back then, the lake had seemed enormous, a world of mystery and adventure. Now, though smaller in his eyes, it still held its quiet magic. A squirrel darted across the trail, pausing to look at him before vanishing into the trees. Birds sang softly overhead, their voices delicate against the silence of the morning. Reflections in the water. As the path drew close to the lake, Samuel stopped. The water was clear, the surface like glass. He knelt and touched it lightly, sending ripples outward. In the reflection, he saw his own face, lined with age, marked by time. But he also saw the sky, wide and open, stretching endlessly above. For a moment the two images blended, the man he was and the world around him. "Not done yet," he whispered, almost smiling. He stood, letting the breeze brush against his cheek. It carried a coolness that felt alive, a reminder that life moved forward no matter how heavy the past. The old bench. Halfway around the lake stood an old wooden bench, weathered by years of rain and sun. Samuel sat down, the wood damp beneath him. From here he could see the cabin across the water, its chimney still releasing a thin trail of smoke. He remembered sitting on this bench with his grandfather. They would fish from this spot, lines cast out into the still water, waiting in patient silence. Sometimes they caught something, sometimes not, but the waiting had always mattered more than the catching. Samuel closed his eyes and let the memory settle. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice, steady and kind. "Life is like fishing, Sam. You can't control what bites. You can only keep casting, keep waiting, keep hoping." Meeting a stranger. As he sat lost in thought, footsteps approached from the trail. Samuel looked up to see an older man walking with a cane. Chapter 7. Echoes of Memory. The days after the storm settled into a gentler rhythm. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn air that carried both coolness and comfort. Each morning Samuel stepped outside the cabin to breathe in the scent of pine and fallen leaves. He felt lighter, though he could not yet explain why. Clara stayed nearby, sometimes visiting the cabin, sometimes returning to her small house down the road. Her presence was steady, like the rhythm of the lake itself. Samuel found himself looking forward to her company, the easy conversation, the laughter that slipped naturally into their days. One morning she mentioned something that stirred his curiosity. "There's an autumn fair in town this weekend," she said, as they shared coffee on the porch. "Just a simple gathering, music, food, neighbors catching up before winter. You should come." Samuel hesitated. Crowds had never bothered him before, but now, after months of solitude and years of carrying his private burdens, the idea of stepping into the middle of a gathering felt daunting. Clara read his silence and smiled gently. "You don't have to stay long, but sometimes being with people helps remind us we're still part of the world." He nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." The town square. On Saturday afternoon, Samuel drove the old truck into town. The streets were alive with color. Stalls lined the square, their tables piled with apples, pumpkins, and jars of honey. Strings of golden leaves hung between the lampposts. Children ran past with painted faces, laughter echoing through the crisp air. The sound of a fiddle carried from the center of the square, where musicians played a lively tune. Couples danced, boots striking the wooden platform with cheerful rhythm. Samuel parked at the edge of the square and stepped out. For a moment he stood still, taking it all in. He hadn't been part of something like this in years. The noise, the movement, the warmth of community. It was almost overwhelming, but also strangely inviting. Clara appeared from the crowd, waving. She wore a scarf of deep red, the color of autumn leaves. Her cheeks glowed from the chill air. "You made it," she said with a smile. "Wouldn't miss it," though part of him still felt uncertain. Faces from the past. As they walked through the fair, Samuel caught sight of familiar faces. People he hadn't seen in decades, neighbors from his youth. Some looked older, some hardly changed at all. "Samuel!" a man called out, approaching with a look of recognition. It was Mark Holloway, who had once been his fishing partner as a boy. His hair was silver now, his steps slower, but the smile was the same. "Mark," Samuel said, shaking his hand, "it's been a long time." "Too long," Mark replied. "Didn't think I'd see you back here. The lake's been quieter without you." They shared a laugh, and for a moment Samuel felt himself return to those childhood summers, racing across the fields and casting lines into the lake with youthful hope. As the afternoon passed, more people greeted him. Some remembered his grandfather, others asked about his years away. Each conversation was like a small thread weaving him back into the fabric of the community he had once belonged to. The music and the fire. Near the center of the square, a fire pit burned brightly. People gathered around with mugs of hot cider, steam rising into the cool air. Samuel accepted a cup from Clara, the warmth seeping into his hands. The musicians began a slower tune, a melody that carried both joy and sorrow, the kind of song that seemed to hold the weight of time. Chapter 8. A New Dawn at the Cabin. The first light of morning crept slowly across the lake. A pale silver glow spread over the still water, softening the edges of the trees and painting the cabin in quiet hues. Samuel stood on the porch, a blanket around his shoulders, watching the world awaken. The air was cool, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Mist rose gently from the surface of the lake, curling upward like breath. Each ripple caught the light, shimmering with quiet promise. He had seen countless dawns in his life, on city streets after long nights at the firehouse, in hospital waiting rooms, in quiet corners of grief. But this dawn felt different. This one belonged to him. A morning of stillness. Inside, Clara was still asleep. She had stayed the night after the fair, too tired to drive home. Samuel had risen early, unable to resist the pull of the morning. He sipped coffee from a chipped mug, the warmth steadying his hands. For the first time in years, his mind felt calm, no rush of alarms or memories pressing in, just the soft rhythm of breath, the hum of life in the woods, the slow turning of the world. Birdsong began in the trees, tentative at first, then swelling into chorus. Somewhere across the lake, a deer stepped out from the forest to drink, its reflection rippling in the water. Samuel smiled faintly. So much life I nearly forgot to see. Clara's awakening. The creak of the porch boards signaled Clara's arrival. She stepped outside, pulling her sweater close, her hair still tousled from sleep. "You're up early," she said, her voice soft with morning. "Couldn't miss this," Samuel replied, gesturing toward the lake. She followed his gaze, her expression gentle. "It's beautiful, almost like the world starting over." "Maybe it is," he murmured. They stood side by side in silence, watching as the sun slowly climbed, spilling gold across the water. Conversations of hope. Later, as they shared breakfast inside the cabin, eggs and toast cooked over the fire, Clara spoke thoughtfully. "You know, Sam, you don't have to figure everything out at once. Life isn't about solving every piece of the puzzle in one morning. Sometimes it's just about being willing to keep going. I think," he said slowly, "I'm ready to stop running from the past, ready to live with it instead of against it." Clara smiled. "That sounds like a good beginning." Walking the shore. As the day warmed, they walked the shoreline together. The storm had left behind scattered branches and driftwood, but the lake was calm, reflecting the bright sky. Samuel picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hand. "When I was young, I used to throw rocks into the lake just to see the ripples spread. I thought they'd go on forever." "Maybe they do," Clara said. "Maybe every choice we make keeps rippling out in ways we'll never see." He tossed the stone gently into the water. The rings spread wide, overlapping, disappearing into the surface.